Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for being here for the final debate of Michaelmas term. As is custom for the final debate of term, we start by handing over from the outgoing elected officers from Michaelmas to Lent 2018. I'd like to say a huge thank you to everyone here tonight who supported this term, and especially to the team of 60 or so students that make up the full committee here, as well as all the stewards and everyone that's been helping out. It's been really appreciated, and I hope that all of us as members have really enjoyed this term. The elected officers will now hand over. A big thank you to all of them for working so hard this term to deliver on their manifestos for you and so much more. Starting first of all with Charlie. Charlie's our social events officer. If you attended the Freshers' Ball or any number of events from the Bridgemas party to yoga, you've been to something that Charlie worked really hard to put together for us this term. He's done an excellent job as social events officer, and he will be handing over to Owen Jack. Next, we have Miles. Miles has been our treasurer this term, and he's made sure that money is really spent for the maximum value for all of our members, and also that we've had more members' discounts than ever before. He's been diligent in his role, and it's been really appreciated this term and for the next 2 terms as well. This time, he's going to hand over to our treasurer, Penelope Jones. Charles has been our speakers officer for Michaelmas. He's delivered more speakers and a wider variety of speakers than ever this term. We've heard from leading voices in this chamber from a wide range of fields, from Ian McKellen, Caitlin Jenner, Stephen Hawking, Baroness Hale, just to name a few. And we've had so many special moments here due to his hard work. So thank you very much, Charles. And Charles will be handing over to Jonas Steen. The debates this term have been incredibly exciting and dynamic, and we've had far more debates and far more interaction than usual. That's due to the hard work and perseverance and unwavering commitment of Andrea, our executive officer. Her dedication to raising the quality and profile of union debates here has really paid off this term, and it's thanks to her that we've had one of the most engaged and discursive programs of debates. So Andrea will be handing over to Rihanna Voice. Not quite handing over, but a quick note of thanks to Tom, our Vice President, and to Tudor and Imran, our debating officers. They don't go through handover, but they do put in an awful lot of work across the terms in the union. So I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to them as hugely valued members of the Michaelmas team and the other teams as well. So a quick round of applause for Tom, Imran, and Tudor. And finally, thank you so much for having me as your president. It's been a great honor, and I've really enjoyed working with you all and discussing so many different things this term. It has been a really exciting term, and we're looking forward to another very exciting term with the Lent 2018, who will be led by Jonah Sirks.
Thank you. And that is it. There's no more people to hand over. Thank you very much to the amazing Michaelmas team. Hopefully you will agree with me that it's been an incredible term full of a variety of different events for everybody, and hopefully next term will be just as good. So let's keep posted on that. But tonight, however, we have our presidential debate, and a very interesting one it is. This House believes social media is anti-social. Sorry, just checking my Twitter. We've got 4 great speakers on either side this evening. As usual, any of you can intervene in this debate in the usual ways. I'll run through them quickly just to remind you. So the first of these is to make a point of information. You can make a point of information, and this applies to any speaker, including the 4 at the front, or the 8 at the front, and anyone in the audience. And you can do this by standing up during a speaker's speech and saying, on that point or point of information, it can only be during any time that's not the first minute or the last minute of the speech, as those are protected times for the speakers. The speaker can choose to say no, which is great. Feel free to do that. You can also say yes and take the question. But it does cut into your time that you've been given for the speech. The second way is that we'll be doing 2 rounds of floor speeches, firstly after the second set of speakers, and finally at the end of the debate as well. And you'll have an opportunity then to speak in proposition, opposition, or abstention of the motion. And again, anybody can do that. Please just state your name and college when you stand up and wait for a microphone to reach you. Otherwise, we can get started. We begin with Paige Nyame Satterthwaite. We will applaud. This is the first time Paige has been seen out of the office in years. She's made it about 20 meters away from her desk, and even that alone warrants an applause. Thank you, Paige.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you to everyone who is here this evening. It's been great to have so much interaction across the floor this term, and so I do really welcome points of information and interventions tonight, not just in my opponent's speeches, but in mine as well. So please do engage, and I look forward to the floor rounds as well. I'm really glad that we're finishing this term on a topic, and I hope a conversation that affects all of us and is really important in a number of ways. The union has been going for 202 years, and the conversation about having conversations and connectivity has always been a central one. But specifically discussing social media has obviously been a much more recent discussion in the past couple of years, and I'm really glad that we're able to look at this new framing of communication tonight. It is a topic that affects generations differently. It can mean different things to different people, and it is evolving. And I know that throughout side proposition, we'll try to elaborate more on the definitions this evening. The motion before the House tonight is the House believes that social media is antisocial. To be very clear, that does not mean that we're assessing whether social media is good or bad as such, or questioning the intent of those involved in that industry, many of whom are our speakers tonight, and also those who participate or engage with it will be most of us, if not all of us, who engage with social media. What we are asking is whether this media form is social or antisocial. Specifically, I'll be focusing in design and in effect. Has it been completely mislabeled when it is termed social media? Social media, to define it briefly, can be widely defined as online platforms that encourage sharing and consuming of content, or more practically, we're talking about Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, in terms of the most used platforms. Are they social, as the name says, or are they antisocial? Are they supporting social activity, or are they disruptive to that? Side proposition would strongly argue the former, and hopefully we're going to give you a lot of reasons why and a lot of questions that side opposition really need to address. I think this is an important conversation because it's about the fundamentals of how we all communicate. It's one issue that has been relevant as a topic of discussion throughout every event, every speaker, every discussion this term, from speakers like Anthony Scaramucci to the Scottish independence debate, which has been quite a wide range of discussion. And the irony also of the union having more social media platforms than ever, and having a hashtag for tonight, and conducting an online poll via Facebook about this debate are definitely not lost. But that doesn't mean that it's all social, and it doesn't mean that these things are all doing the connecting that Facebook claims it is. There are some serious doubts, I think, as to whether social media is social at all, that the opposition need to confront, and I look forward to hearing their responses on that, and that side proposition aim to outline and develop as we go down the bench. On-side opposition, arguably, it doesn't matter that a social media society is one where more people than ever are isolated, and that isolation is both physically, but also in terms of the opinions that they hear. And I know and imagine that this is something that a lot of our speakers will be touching on tonight. To side proposition, those sorts of issues really do matter. What we're going to argue tonight goes against everything that social media companies want you to look into, and instead of just listening passively, we really want to address at least 3 things. Firstly, whether social media is antisocial by design. Secondly, if it's antisocial in its effects. And thirdly, looking at whether the engagements are genuine or actually antisocial ones. So firstly, in design, it's not always obvious as to the design of social media and what you're walking into, but it's quite an interesting thing to explore. Social media does appear either intentionally or by default just to be antisocial by design, and a good illustration of this that others have employed is how it's quite similar to a casino. I don't know casinos that well, it's not something that the union's driven me to, but hopefully you'll start to see the parallels. Why is a casino relevant? When you walk into a casino, or so I hear, it's very much about an attention-based economy. So everything is mostly visual. You're interacting with machines. We've seen the same development with social media. Facebook statuses in written form have become more and more outdated. We're looking more at Snapchat now as the upcoming thing, visual content, snap streaks, autoplay videos. We've moved more and more to the visual side of what social media means. The same slot machine mentality is employed in social media with everything from delayed gratification on notifications, having to scroll down and literally refresh things like a slot machine, and the whole like-react culture and what that promotes. In the same way that a casino is sold as a space for people, even though the interaction is lots of people in isolation, we seem to have a very similar setup with social media, with more person-to-screen interactions happening than ever before, and far fewer people-to-people, face-to-face social interactions. On a very basic level, a lot of people would define being social by those face-to-face interactions, and social media very much eliminates those. In effect, this is one of the clear effects: less face-to-face communication, less conversation. This idea that we have more friends than ever and more online connections, but that we're more alone than ever. And study after study is now showing that at every level of society, young to old, we're becoming more physically isolated. If you are connected and engaging on social media, you can often feel that you're also more distracted. And then if you're alone or you decide to take time off of social media, there's this fear of missing out, which is, again, prevalent and has risen a lot with the rise of social media. I think that hopefully the opposition will explore the side and detriments of loneliness and social isolation that have been seen as real harms from social media, and maybe reconcile them with why it can still be called social. But I think on side proposition, we really see it as being a net negative impact. And in terms of places where, for example, discussion and conversation and collective action seem to have been facilitated by social media, again, more and more questions of how sustainable and how genuine the social media interaction that we saw in the uprisings in the Middle East or even in local riots has been questioned. A lot of it has gone very quickly afterwards, and it's been very short-term in terms of benefit, but in long-term, we've seen very fragile systems that have occurred. I think in some, you see here that social media attempts in its design to have the effect that you don't notice how alone you are, and the effect is, in part, a huge loneliness. I think that anecdotally, we can also, many of us can think of times when we've been on social media and it's become a bit of a time sink. This is, again, something that people talk about in relation to casinos. I don't know how true that is, but I do know that social media and many, many people have engaged, watched things, scrolled down news feeds, and instead of 7, 8 minutes having gone, 20 minutes, hours have gone. Another really interesting way in which this... yes, of course.
You say that it is loneliness, everyone being on social media. But even if you are in the physical sense lonely, you don't have lots of people around you, surely the fact that you can have a digital company, even if they're not people who would physically be around you, surely that digital company in some way mitigates that loneliness, and maybe that makes you feel better, and maybe that's a good thing, don't you think?
So I completely agree, and I think it's an important point that the reason why people, especially when, for example, someone does cancel plans or they are feeling more lonely, or even short trips like being on the bus by yourself, people will often turn to their phone. It's often seen as a comfort blanket. But looking at how long-term effects have been assessed, it's often seen that people who turn to social media because they feel lonely only feel more lonely. After you cross kind of a 2-hour threshold, it's been widely reported, and as far as Facebook and Microsoft reporting on this now, that people do feel more lonely after that amount of time, even if they've got this artificial construct in which they can see other people's faces, or they can see other people having fun. It could be they can see other photographs and interactions in which they were also involved. The problem is that Facebook or Instagram or Twitter aren't designed to make you feel like you've got digital company. And I think often the comfort mechanisms that you describe in people looking to social media to maybe comfort them in times of physical loneliness just don't play out and are not supported by the infrastructure that social media companies are working towards. But I think it's an important point, and that it's certainly not the case that social media is of zero presence at all. I just think, unfortunately, when we look at the actual impacts, it's one that doesn't hold up. Was there a point there?
So you say that social media doesn't support a framework to make people feel included, but that's not the case. I mean, the CEO of Facebook, Twitter, they've all talked about setting up filter bubbles to make sure that people would see the viewpoints that they relate to, so that they'll feel more included in their social media community. What do you have to say about that?
So I'm not surprised that the CEO of Facebook or other people promoting their social media companies do use this really positive language of connectivity, of social engagement. Is this actually true? Proposition are basically arguing no, and I think when you look at what do kind of autoplay videos have to do, or capturing the attention of people for so long have to do with supporting them and making them feel more included? What did the design framework that led to fake news, which I'm sure other speakers will elaborate on, and these other quite negative and self-censoring groupings online, what design framework there was to promote connectivity? So I do appreciate that the language used to promote social networks is very much a social one, and that's very much in the interests of these companies. I'm not saying that they're ill-intentioned in any way. I hope they're not. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of it seems to be just language. It's not backed up by the psychology that's behind it, by the design frameworks. And the majority of people that have actually worked with these companies and then left and gone into other areas tend to speak of these same things, that actually this language of connectivity is really not backed up in fact. So I hope that addresses some of that point, but if you want to elaborate, do bring that in the floor round as well. I think finally I would point to the fact that social media is just not facilitating meaningful or genuine social connection in many areas, and it's because it's not intending to do so. If in design it's antisocial, if in effect it's antisocial, and if the engagement it facilitates is antisocial, it's starting to get clear as to where we're leading. It doesn't lead us to connecting more. It does lead us to phenomena such as fake news, to echo chambers, to some of or the most isolated generation, and huge gaps, finally, between those who are on Facebook and feel like they can't opt out. Many people would say they can't quit Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram or whatever it is, and in most instances, we would call that sort of attitude addiction. In this case, it's very much people don't feel that they can opt out due to social reasons. And then those that are left out for whatever reason, be it socioeconomic, be where they are geographically, especially if you look to the developing world and how social media is being used as a gateway to the internet, and people, instead of having the opt-out problem, are forced to opt in. It seems that the trade-offs that we're talking about are ones where genuine social interaction falls by the wayside, and actually quite an anti-social agenda is being pushed. I'll leave it to the rest of side proposition to elaborate on how and why social media is truly not as social as it says it is. And I would thank everyone here tonight. I'd thank everyone for their floor points, and just everyone this term who's added their voice to the union. It's been really great to hear so many voices, to have so many discussions. I hope that you'll discuss after the event as well, no matter which way you vote. As a final plea to you all, I'd say, in your continuing belief in conversation, in free speech, and the tools that facilitate all of that, I would strongly urge you to support the proposition and leave through the right-hand door marked ayes. I think that the media that we call social media is antisocial for the reasons outlined. I think side opposition do have a lot to explain, but I look forward to hearing it, and I think that side proposition will continue to extend and explain why this is the case. So thank you, and please vote for the proposition tonight.
Thank you very much to Paige, and I'm sure and I hope that won't be the last time that we hear you speak in here, because it's been a pleasure sort of working with you this term, so thank you very much for that, and you've done an amazing job. We'll now move on to side opposition. Our first speaker is Adnan Sarwar, who is The Economist's community editor, leading a 10-person team of social media producers who manage the newspaper's 52 million social followers, which is almost as many likes as Paige has on a profile picture. Almost. Adnan, the floor is yours.
Can I drink some water? Yeah. Thank you. Social media is social, in case you weren't aware. Firstly, social media do enable and create conversation. That is unarguable. They are a tool for conversation. That they are abused by trolls and can lead to unhappiness in some does not negate the fact that the architecture is there to make conversation. It is traditionally broadcast media that is a lecture, but it is social media that has created the ability to have a conversation to newspapers and other broadcasters. Social media does and should allow for the horizontal transfer of views, and it does do that. A fine example of how not to use social media is Donald Trump. He's the 21st most popular person on Twitter. He's huge on Twitter. That may convey he is successful at it, but he used it as a lecture and purely as broadcast. He hardly ever replies to the many people who hit the conversation bubble under his tweets. His use of Twitter is unsophisticated and crude, but he does at least cause a conversation still. Social media platforms also have become important news aggregators. The Reuters Institute Digital News Report 2017 found that more than 4 in 10, so 41% of people, use social media to get their news in the UK. The use of WhatsApp for news is starting to rival Facebook in a number of markets, including Malaysia, Brazil, and Spain. This means people have better access to information and news so they can fuel their discussions offline. #IRL. A great local example of this is a lady called Mel Bound, who was a mother who wanted to go for a run, and so she invited others to do that with her on Facebook. Over 70 people turned up, and so what she did was she created running communities across London and Bristol for mothers who were at home and wanting to be social and wanting to meet other people. This Mum Runs is now her full-time job. I'm not advertising it for her. There are many other examples of people with rare forms of cancer who've connected over Facebook groups and to marginalised groups. So I would argue it has connected people in very meaningful ways across the world. It can do more. I served in the Iraq War in 2003 and then again in 2006, 2007. I joined the British Army because it was, and I still believe it is, a force for good. Aside from social media allowing me to stay in touch with former soldiers who still work in mine clearance across the world, there were things that happened on the battlefield that should not have. They were filmed by soldiers, and then those films inevitably leaked from phones across networks, and when newspapers and broadcasters got hold of them, those unfortunate incidents, such as Abu Ghraib, were spread across the world using social media. And this meant Iraqi civilians came into the conversations that they didn't feel they were part of before. On leaving the military, myself and other soldiers used social media to organize a peace movement. We spoke to Israelis, Americans, and South Africans, and others. Of course, there's always the charge of slacktivism, and that's where skeptics will argue supporting a cause online will make you even less likely to take action because you feel you've done your bit. Why go and march against a war that you don't agree with, say, if you can just click like on a button on Facebook? But that is a behavior, and that can be challenged and changed. The potential is absolutely there with social media to create movements. If you could just cast your mind back to now, #MeToo, one of the most urgent conversations of our time, passing from real life across social media, back into real life, back across social media, and that's carrying the conversation around the world. Go for it.
All these things about activism and things like that, what do they have to do with being social and actual real communication between people? All of these things you mentioned were around before, for example, anti-war protests and protests for feminism or otherwise.
Thank you. So in the 1980s, AIDS was seen as a gay disease, and so it was gay people who had to become the activists and had to collect themselves together and start looking for cures. And it was very hard for them to do that. If they were doing that today, it would be a lot easier for them to do that because they'd be using social media. If you were protesting against wars before, yes, of course, you come together and you can do that. It just makes it easier. So it's a capability that social media gives you. Thank you.
You mentioned the #MeToo movement, for example. However, every single big instance of, or the vast majority of big movements, be it of all the big political figures in the US and in the UK and in Hollywood, whatever, that have been accused of sexual assault or something of the sort, the vast majority of them were not due to Me Too. Me Too might have created an environment, but what actually caused a consequence was when evidence was appeared in traditional media, not in social media.
Yeah. So thank you. You just pointed out that Me Too helped with the conversation. It helped it. And I'm not saying Me Too, the hashtag, is going to solve the problem, but it's going to cause an awareness of that problem. Just like you were saying before about, for instance, the Arab Spring. Okay, a hashtag, Twitter, is not going to solve the Arab Spring, but it's going to create a wider noise for those people. Okay, social media is not perfect, but it is just a new iteration. Every new means of communication ever invented, the printing press, TV, radio, has sparked moral panic. We're still trying to figure out how social media works, and we should give it a chance. We can see the potential past us here in the West. The social media team at the newspaper that I work at, The Economist, has engaged audiences in Asia using a social media app called Line. We are talking to people we have never met before, and those we would not have met unless we'd traveled to Japan and other countries in the region. So I would argue we're not there yet, and I would argue even at times that Mark Zuckerberg doesn't understand Facebook. The user has changed it past what it was and will continue to change it. Believing it is some evil network that surrounds us all is to not believe in ourselves and not believe in yourselves. It is us who are humans who have made changes. There is so much potential here, and it's going to take the users to define what they want from those platforms. The Romans did it with papyrus rolls and messengers. Today, hundreds of millions of people do the same things rather quickly and easier using Facebook, Twitter, blogs, and other internet tools. It connects people around the world in an instant. A good example is the older generation, who may not have been able to be in touch with their friends for years, but are now more connected. The number of over 75s on social media has doubled in the past year, according to Ofcom. It removes geographic limitations. You no longer have to be in the same physical space as somebody to communicate as much as you want to be. I'm not asking you to just travel on Instagram. You should actually go on real holidays too. It helps galvanize in real-life movements and meetups. If you're in a niche group, depending on your context, for example, if you're homosexual or you're a rural nerd who likes metropolitan architecture, you can find your people online. And this is very powerful for marginalized groups, especially, and it leads to love, activism, hope, justice, and community. Some people are introverts or even autistic. The distance a computer gives them when connecting to other human spirits is essential to helping them be who they really are inside. Social media, and especially WhatsApp and Snapchat, are the most important communication tools for teenagers. While they may seem passive staring at their phones, young people are extending their social lives online and continuing their in-real-life discussions. To end, I'll say this: social media does make you social, and it has the potential to do more. Imagine being able to talk to everybody in the world. You can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adnan. And speaking of Twitter campaigns which have got the world talking, this evening we have a Twitter handle for this debate, which is #CUSpresidential, which no doubt you will see on Donald Trump's Twitter very soon, so he's watching. We now go back to side proposition, and our second speaker is Tom Hashemi. Tom is the director of We Are Flint, a research, design, and communications agency, and like me, he also has the difficult task of following Paige. So, Tom, the floor is yours. After the second set.
Thank you all. Thank you for inviting me along to speak tonight. I was pretty excited to come and speak tonight. I'm here with my partner, Clara, who, for those of you that can see her, is with bump. Baby is due tomorrow. So this was hit and miss. Hopefully we're not going to, excuse me, see baby turn up halfway through. One of the reasons I was really excited to come down and speak tonight was because social media has largely been theoretical for me over the past few years. We do research into social media networks, we analyze the demographics of their users, we do reports into memes and how memes affected the US presidential election. But with baby on the way, it kind of all got a bit real. It's like social media is no longer this theoretical thing. A few weeks ago, Clara and I had a fight about whether we put baby photos on Facebook, which sounds menial when you, excuse me, when you say it in an auditorium like this, but it was quite an emotional argument. We went for each other. My argument in that with Clara was, we don't know what technology is going to be like in 20 years' time. I used to work for a big data agency, and they could tell from someone's Instagram posts whether they were likely to be depressed. Think about what you can do with 20 years' worth of data on someone when every movement has been recorded on social media, the brands they've engaged with, the newspapers their parents read, the clothes they were given as children. What are we going to be able to tell about that child? How are we going to be able to influence that child as a result of all that knowledge? Change what they think, change what they buy, influence what they do. So, and I suppose actually the bigger point to all of that is, what does baby think? Does baby want to have a social media profile set up for it without its consent before it's even said its first words? I think that argument points at the root of what we're here to talk about tonight, which is whether social media has impacted or negated social norms. And I've kind of taken antisocial. I think the Cambridge definition of antisocial is harmful to society. Oxford defined it as contrary to the laws and norms of society. I think the second definition is what I've gone for. Is social media working contrary to the laws and norms of our society? And using baby as a case study, I think we can see that it is, simply because it's made our norms redundant, made them obsolete. We don't have a norm for 21st century parents of whether they should put baby photos on Facebook. It hasn't happened before, right? For the last 10 years, it's brand new. Baby photos is a relatively small example. If we extrapolate that up and we look at the other things that social media is affecting, so two things that I want to talk about tonight. First is experts and the rejection of experts as caused by social media, as I will argue, see whether you agree. And the second is the challenge that social media poses to the concept of a free media, the concept of a pluralistic media. based on where I see social media going in the next few years. So first up, rejection of expert opinion. I'm sure all of you saw Michael Gove's pithy quotes on everyone's had enough of experts during the Brexit campaign, and I think he was probably right. I think as a nation, I think we probably have had enough of experts. Modern society is built on that expertise. It's built on knowledge. It's a social norm that we accept that knowledge and we build on it ourselves. Rejecting knowledge is a bit ridiculous. And how social media plays into that. My old agency, a company called Edelman, had an influencer model called the pyramid of influence. At the top of your pyramid, you have your traditional influencer types, CEOs, journalists, academics, politicians. At the bottom, you have general public. So if you want to influence the general public, you go through the top. Then you've got the mid-2000s, social media comes along. You get the diamond of influence. You're going to have to imagine I've got two hands there. You can still go top-down influencer, but you can also go bottom-up. You can influence the general public through what we called activist consumers. Now, what social media did was it allowed anyone with an opinion to be that activist consumer, to influence the masses. We've always been able to tell people what we thought. We've always been free to have our opinions. But pre-social media, you didn't have a stage. You didn't have a platform to say it. Social media gave people a platform, gave people who have an opinion who don't necessarily have any background to that opinion, any credibility for that opinion. They were given a stage to go and talk about something that they don't have any expertise on, as long as they've got 10,000 Twitter followers. Secondly, the effect of social media on the media. So I think we probably all agree that the media is a key pillar of democracy. It's a key pillar of the UK, of America, of all the modern democracies. Traditionally, we saw journalists, editors, publishers being the gatekeepers of information, people that would verify and validate information before it was disseminated to the masses. Today, we're starting to see, as you touched upon, social media companies being the gateways. We referenced Facebook being the launching point for 40% of people to get access to their news. Many people, our research shows that 78% of people in the UK have used Facebook. If 40% of people are using Facebook to access that content, at the moment, Facebook allows us to jump out. Right? When we click on a link in Facebook to BBC or CNN, we go to the BBC or CNN website. We read the news. In the past year, we've seen Facebook make moves to create its own content. Facebook has announced relationships with Vox and BuzzFeed to create content that would sit on Facebook's platform. They've recently announced a $1 billion investment into content to sit on their own platform. So we're seeing a platform that 78% of us use. We're using it to access news, and shortly that content is going to be created by the platform that we're on. Now that completely changes the notion of pluralistic media. It challenges the concept of democracy as we currently know it. So back to the original question, is social media antisocial? Obviously, I'm arguing that it is. I think it is because of things like revenge porn, things like cyberbullying, things like rejection of expert opinion, and the potential for the media industry as we know it to be gutted. And as a result, I hope you vote for the proposition.
Thank you very much to Tom, and good luck with the baby. I hope it goes well. We now move over again to the opposition, to Susie Hargreaves. Susie joined the Internet Watch Foundation in September 2011 as its chief executive and has worked in the charity sector for more than 25 years in a range of senior positions. Susie, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, distinguished guests, fellow speakers, I'm honoured to be here today to talk to you, to argue for the motion against that social media is antisocial. I do work for the Internet Watch Foundation, which is the UK hotline for reporting and removing online child sexual abuse. And yes, I work in the darkest, most heinous area of the internet. And it's a space in which the most vulnerable in society, children from across the world, are photographed and videoed being raped and sexually tortured, and their images and videos of these terrible crimes are shared across the internet. So surely you'd think I'd be on the other side, as I see possibly the worst side of humanity. But no, because I also believe passionately in the wonder of the internet and its ability to connect people across the globe. And there's no better example of this than social media. Social media isn't antisocial or social, it's a technical tool that people use. And yes, this technology can be abused and misused by some people. But as a rule, with social animals, we are the 2.46 billion social media users across the world, and the 22% of Facebook, of the world's population who are on Facebook, and the clear majority of us are using social media for good. And we're all using it for one reason, to connect. Because that's what social media is about, connecting people. Connecting people on many levels, from sharing the mundane to helping those in emergency situations, connecting the young, the old, the desperate, the lonely, the isolated, and those in need, right through to party animals. It's about connectivity, and connectivity in its very nature is social. Now, I live and work in Cambridge. I actually live in Histon and Impington, which has a population of just over 11,000. We have a village Facebook group called HI People, and there are 3,418 members on the Facebook page. And I'd like to share with you a post from yesterday. Hi, we're new to the area, and our son has recently joined Year 4 at the junior school. It would be lovely for him to have play dates, to get to know some children outside of school, and for us to meet some local parents. Can you help? Here are some of the answers. Welcome to the village. I have a daughter in Year 5, but I'm happy to help. Welcome, my son is in the same year, let's meet. Hi, I will link you to the Year 4 Facebook page so you can meet other parents. In October this year, a feature in The Guardian entitled I Found My Tribe told the moving stories of some people helped by social media, and these included Winnie from Indonesia, who'd found the forum Hamster Hideout, which helped her understand how to care for her Russian hamsters. She then started drawing her hamsters and other animals, and now sells these portraits on the forum and works in an animal rescue centre. Fred, a journalist from Kent who is transgender, who learned to understand his transition with the support of YouTube posts, even choosing his surgeon because of YouTube. Or Adam, diagnosed with Asperger's when he was 12, who set up a website and used Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn to talk about his autism. He says that 99% of the people that he now knows are those that he met online, and he met his current partner on Instagram. But I hear you say, what about the trolls? What about the cyberbullies? What about the impact on young people's mental health? I am no apologist for illegal or bad behavior. As a society, we must step up and confront illegal and offensive and inappropriate and antisocial behavior. But you have to help people to use social media properly. In the same way as we teach children how to cross a road, or how we all learn to drive, so that we can be aware of the risks and also the ways in which we can keep ourselves safe. And the good news is that there's loads of help available, particularly for children. The IWF, my organisation, is a third of the UK Safer Internet Centre. We work with partners to deliver an extensive programme of awareness raising in schools, running helpline for teachers and other professionals, and organising and delivering UK Safer Internet Day each year, which is an event that happens across the world. In 2017, UK Safer Internet Day reached 3 million children and 2 million parents in the UK alone. But what about the social media companies? The global internet giants, what are they doing? And surely they could be doing more. And the answer is, of course they could be doing more. All of us could be doing more. And of course they need to be held to account. But I work with them daily, and I know that they are constantly looking for ways to protect people on their platforms. For example, Microsoft created a tool called PhotoDNA, which can take a digital fingerprint, what's known as a hash, of known images of child sexual abuse, and it can be used to search for all the duplicates. They make this tool free to all internet companies, including social media companies, to search their platforms for any of these images and videos. Every day, Facebook, Twitter, and other companies take our hash list of over 300,000 photodNA images and check every single image that you upload onto Facebook to ensure that these duplicates aren't circulated. Facebook has created many tools to help people across the world connect in crisis. This year, they worked with UNICEF, Red Cross, and the World Food Programme, and other organizations to produce disaster maps that use aggregated, de-identified Facebook data to help organizations address the critical gap in information they face, often when they're responding to natural disasters. This helps us create a complete picture of how people are affected, so they can determine where resources like food, water, medical supplies are needed, and where people need help and need to be rescued. Facebook also helped UNICEF with a project to engage men in Brazil as allies in the fight against the Zika virus, as over 90% of the population use the platform every month. They pulled together anonymized insights about the Zika conversation from all the Facebook posts and shared these results with UNICEF, who were able to incorporate the learnings into a data-driven campaign that led to 82% of those reached acting to protect themselves against the Zika virus. I'm going to finish by recalling Adam. You remember, he is the young man who used Facebook and Twitter to talk about his autism. He said, "The online world has changed everything for me. I am very lucky. In an earlier time, I couldn't have done it." Chair, fellow speakers, distinguished guests, I give you social media, and I argue that it's a force for good. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. We'll now go to a floor round for the opportunity for people to give speeches in proposition, opposition, and abstention. If I choose you to put your hand up, and please state your name and college when the microphone reaches you for the records. So, we begin with any speeches in proposition of the motion, "This House believes social media is antisocial." Yes. Go for the microphone there, please. Thank you.
Luke Usehall. No one doubts that social media is useful. It is useful, but neither side has actually mentioned the personal and psychological impact of social media in the way we intimately relate to each other over a long period of time, like 50, 60 years, and how this is different from before. Therefore, Facebook encourages us that friends are merely a commodity to be accumulated, and experiences are something to be captured in photos to be advertised for likes. No one can have 500 friends.
Thank you, Luke. Please, can we now have a speech from somebody in opposition? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Charles Connor, King's College. Sorry. Thank you. Let me just get my device on the right way around. Much as it loathes me to speak against such an esteemed president, I'm afraid I'm going to have to, because this is the first time I've been allowed to get my say in for Paige. Sorry, Paige, she's been wonderful. Paige started by saying this isn't a good, bad thing. And it's not. But we have been sort of engaging with that axis. We heard in the last speech that social media is a force for good. Sorry, my phone clearly isn't a force for good, since it's currently rotating around. But what we're doing is we're playing with two different axes. We're playing with good, bad, and social, antisocial. And they're not the same thing. Social is sociological. The word antisocial is fundamentally laden with lots of different malign connotations. Think about a hermit in 14th century Europe. He was fundamentally antisocial, but he was also probably quite good in terms of his moral behavior. As a historian, obviously, I like to dwell upon those things, and I think there has been a historical dimension to this. We heard that in the last speech as well. So what is the social? Because ultimately what we're doing is we're fencing against some sort of paradigm. I appreciated the reference to papyrus. I thought that was quite well taken. But the past fundamentally was a miserable place. It really was. This social age, this golden age whereby people were sending letters to each other and people were writing epistolary novels. People were miserable. People were downright miserable. And we can't elevate this grandiose idea of what the social was by attaching it to the past. The social has always been both good and bad. We need to think of it in terms of connection. We need to think of it with less laden aspects and deal with these things without emotion and with more focus on what actually social means. Social is the sociological, not social as good, antisocial as bad.
Thank you very much, Charles. We now move to anyone who'd like to speak in abstention of the motion. Yes.
Thank you. Helen Dallas, Christ College. I've just found myself wondering, as the debate's gone on, whether actually the sociality or lack thereof of social media, or indeed any space in which people gather physically or otherwise, can actually be observed or assessed in an inherent way in the manner that it's being taken in this debate. And I wanted to use kind of more of a real world example, like a physical example. If I pre for a club and then queue for a club and then go to the club and then dance in the club with my friends, that's a social thing and the club seems social. If I go on my own, queue on my own, go in on my own and watch everyone else dancing without me, that feels antisocial. And I feel like that's really relevant, and I feel like it's kind of at the crux of what Paige is talking about, but also what the other side was talking about, really how social media works for you, whether it's social or antisocial, I don't think is inherent to social media, weird as that is. I think it's inherent to our own sociality and how we're then capable of interacting with the media. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will have a second round of floor speeches soon. However, we will now return to the main debate, and we jump back over to the proposition side, where we're joined by Professor Ian Walden. Professor Ian is the Professor of Information and Communications Law in the Centre for Commercial Law Studies at Queen Mary University of London. Ian, the floor is yours.
I'm such a lawyer. And as a lawyer, I, of course, have to start with definitions. And I've been very disappointed by the definitions so far. Because a lot of the conversation has been about definition of social media as a set of services. And of course, that's part of the debate. And I don't try to stop discussions about Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat, etc. But we're missing a dimension. We're missing a type of social media, which is a very important part of why I think the House should support the proposition. And that is, of course, social media applications, peer-to-peer, distributed networks, anarchic social networks that allow people to communicate in a decentralized manner using software such as BitTorrent or Tor or other such software that sits on their machine, allows them to communicate and connect with networks and avoid the service providers that we've talked about so far. And of course, when we talk about Tor, we talk about that inevitable media concept, the dark web. I don't know why everybody always calls it the dark web, but people always talk about it in a very low voice, like it's a very serious place to be. But clearly what we do see on the dark web is we see an ability to buy guns, drugs, engage in all sorts of activities, and inevitably we have a concern about the fact that this is a malicious marketplace. This is a place in which you can buy anything you want that is very illegal in nature. And so I want us to bear in mind these applications, because social media isn't a narrow concept of Facebook, Snapchat, and Twitter. It's actually a very wide space where people use technologies, not just services, people use technologies. So that's social media. Second definition is what is antisocial. I take the point made by the gentleman a moment ago, but of course I'm a lawyer, so I have to have a definition. So my definition avoids the problem. My definition essentially says that criminal conduct, I think we can all agree, is inherently antisocial. Point of information.
Given state decides what's criminal, and not all given states are nice and social. And thus, some things which are deemed to be antisocial are in fact very social indeed. If you were a resistance fighter in France, you would argue that what you were doing was, in the end, quite social. If you were somebody here in the UK, operating completely legally, you might do something social or not. At the end of the day, what's social is not dictated by the state. You can't trust the government to decide what's social. If you want proof of that, let's look at Donald Trump's Twitter page. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I would, of course, agree. I mean, I have been involved in cybercrime legislation over the years, and a Western view of cybercrime is all about unauthorized access and viruses and the distribution of nasty things to do with your computer. When I've worked in countries in Africa, for example, politicians see cybercrime as simply people being nasty to them on Facebook. So we do have different cultural norms as to what constitutes crime, but we have to accept within this society and within this debate that breaking the law is essentially at some level a breach of the social contract. That our society depends on that, and it is a wrong committed against persons, people, property, and the state. And within that vast range of possible crimes, cybercrime has become one of the most prevalent types of wrongdoing currently carried out. And I don't intend to look at all types of cybercrime, but I want to focus on two. One is content-related crime, and Susie's touched upon this. We've got a whole series of criminality based on illegal content. Now, hands up who has never, ever downloaded an infringing copyright work? Not many of you. So, illegal activity, downloading people's property for in breach of legislation and can in certain cases be criminal. We also have hate speech, we have beheading videos, we have a whole range of material which is inherently illegal. So we have content crimes, but we also have contact crimes. And again, some mention has been made of that already. We have the cyberbullying, the cyberstalking, we have harassment, we have doxing. Everybody knows what doxing is? You do, don't you? Revealing people's personal information for causing harm to others. And so we've got these two unique forms of criminality that aren't new crimes per se. There is nothing new about copyright infringement. There's nothing new inherently about harassment. But what social media has allowed is for the proliferation of that behavior, for people to engage in that behavior that would never have done it previously. Please.
Purely you're just criticizing the messenger of the content. I mean, if you ban social media, surely people will still find a way around the block that you've put. At some point, you have to admit that human communication is inherently flawed, and until you acknowledge that fact, we should not be blaming social media for the failings of human communication. Thank you.
I'm certainly not blaming the technology, I'm blaming the users. We have to look at the way in which social media is being used, and we see across a range of content and contact crimes a huge rise in criminality. In respect of abusive and grossly offensive communications, we've seen a rise over tenfold over recent years. In terms of child sexual abuse images, there was a case from the United States called the landslide case, when the FBI arrived at the premises of this server. They found the names of 300,000 people had given their credit card details to access child sexual abuse images. And of those 300,000 people, 7,200 were located in the United Kingdom. And when the police received the list of that 7,200 people, it nearly broke the English criminal justice system. We didn't have the resources to investigate, prosecute, jail that number of people. So we have seen a quantitative change in the nature of criminality caused by social media. And of course, part of the question is who is responsible? Is it the the social media providers? Well, as Susie said, and I would certainly support this, social media providers have been incredibly positive about trying to do something about the rise of criminality, but they are in a catch-22 situation. The laws that we adopted at the early outbreak of the internet told them that if they didn't look, we wouldn't hold them responsible. And so they haven't looked, and the rise of criminality has gone on. Now we turn around and say, suddenly, you've got to do something about it. But if you do something about it, you'll be liable for it. So we can't necessarily blame the service providers. Yes?
Kind of presuming that no one has done anything about this, but the fact is there has been significant efforts to cut down cybercrime in all forms of communication. We see, for instance, the FBI raiding all sorts of dark web services, and you can see how like the Silk Road 2.0, they've all been taken down. So the point is that I'm trying to make is that regulation is possible, it has been done, and I don't see why you're trying to make the point you're trying to make.
Well, I'm sorry, I did make clear that I felt the service providers were doing a lot to try and fight cybercrime. What I'm saying is they're placed in a difficult catch-22 situation where, on the one hand, they are told not to look, not to invade our privacy, not to monitor our communication, and then we turn around and blame them when we see this huge burgeoning appearance of cybercrime. So, finally, where do we look? Why do we break laws? Well, we obviously don't break laws because we are all moral, upstanding people that recognize the social contract that we're part of. Kind of. We kind of break laws because we think we can get away with it. John Nemo, who was earlier this year put in jail for the second time, he was the one that was one of the trolls sending messages to Stella Creasy because he didn't want Jane Austen to appear on a £10 note. He thought he was invisible. He may have been stupid, but he thought he was invisible. An Australian man, Zach Alchin, when the police turned up at his door, his answer was, when he had been accused of sexual aggression, said he was drunk at the time and he wasn't aware that the law made this illegal. But we know that ignorance is no defense. So in conclusion, having agreed that crime is per se antisocial, and accepting that the summer criminality has clearly flourished through social media due to its facility to enable instantaneous, anonymous and secure communications, its ability to intrude into our lives on a 24/7 basis, then you have to, perhaps sadly, admit that the motion should be supported. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Ian, for your speech. We now move over to the opposition. Our third speaker this evening is Judith Donath, a writer and designer who draws from sociology, evolutionary biology, and cognitive science to create innovative social interfaces and experiences, which sounds great. So I'd love to hear about that. Thanks. Judith, the floor is yours.
Thank you. In the spirit of Mark Zuckerberg, who designed Messenger to do away with formalities, such as the onerous effort needed to address a letter with something like, Dear John, I'm going to actually skip any formalities and just go straight to the content. But I want to thank the two people who stopped in the sort of the middle floor discussion. I will be able to address your issue about the 500 friends and the need for a little bit of history here. And so, is social media antisocial? I mean, far from it, as we've seen here tonight. Perhaps a more apt accusation might have been that these platforms are hypersocial. Think, for example, of how they transform even the most mundane solo experiences. I'm in the car now, I'm at a stop sign now, into social occasions, events to be uploaded and, hopefully, acknowledged and liked by somebody. Immersed in the culture of social media, you're never alone. Critics claim that this is shallow, that this omnipresent cloud of virtual friends aren't really friends, noun, meaning number one, a person attached to another by feelings of affection or personal regard. Instead, they're barely acquaintances, friends, noun, meaning number six, a contact on a social media website. But even if these relationships are shallow, the experience is still social. People use social media to find comfort, provide support, to show off, to gossip. People care about the responses they get. They feel ensconced in a group. And if not, they feel the pain of being excluded. It's not always nice, but it certainly is social. Adnan and Susie have given us vivid stories illustrating how social media is. But I'm going to take this a bit further. I'm going to argue that social media are helping us create a society characterized by numerous, diverse, lightweight relationships, and that is exactly what we need today. Not only is social media not antisocial, it is an absolutely essential tool for the truly thriving as social human beings in the contemporary world. At heart, in the very structure of our nervous system, we as humans are social beings. When I mentioned the pain of being excluded, that's literal pain that you feel when social bonds are damaged. The same part of your brain that fires in response to physical injury is activated when you experience a breakup, the death of a loved one, or you're socially excluded. On the positive side, hormones such as oxytocin, which, and I wrote this before you were here, help form the essential bonds between mother and child, as you shall see, have been repurposed over the course of human evolution to also motivate us to trust others, to be generous with them, to bond with our fellow humans. We are, in short, irredeemably and fundamentally social. And for much of human history until very recently, we depended on those social bonds for our very survival. Think of traditional village life, as you were mentioning. To harvest your crops, you relied on close ties to help you out. If you needed help with childcare, you looked at relatives and friends and neighbors. In turn, much of your time and energy was given to sharing tasks with and helping others. People lived, for the most part, in relatively small communities. Their personal network consisted of family and close friends, what sociologists call strong tie networks, ones in which you spend much time and effort on each relationship. Such a network is densely interconnected. Everyone you know knows everybody else, and everyone has a lot in common. This has changed radically. For one, we don't have to rely on other people for much of anything anymore. The market has replaced relationships. We don't rely on each other to raise houses, crops, or children. We buy our apartments from realtors, buy our dinner at the supermarket, we hire sitters for the kids. As long as you have money, that is. You don't actually need other people. Even the advice we once relied on other people to give us is now a commercialized commodity. 20 years ago, if I moved to a new neighborhood and needed, for example, a babysitter, I'd have to strike up some friendships with other local mothers in order to learn who the sitters were, who they trusted, who would they recommend. This sort of reputational information was a core asset of the community, and access to it was one of the valuable perks that came with being a member. But now, you just go to Sitter City to find sitters, elder miners, dog walkers, and cat sitters. You don't need friends to recommend restaurants or plumbers. That's what we have Yelp for. So in the past, we were motivated to maintain strong relationships because we really needed community to survive. Losing that need has weakened those ties and unraveled those close-knit social communities. So what's the role of social media in all this? You're probably asking yourselves. It's certainly not the cause of these vast structural changes in human society. It's not the force that weakened our friendships. The roots of those changes stretch back centuries to the rise of merchants, money, banking, industrialization, urbanization. Social media is, however, an invaluable tool for building the sort of social structures we do need today, characterized by large networks of diverse acquaintances. These networks are much larger than we are capable of maintaining on our own. That's the 150 people. The small networks are the 150 people that evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar has persuasively argued and identified as the general limit of our unaided social sphere. Now, I'm not saying we need only superficial acquaintances. We're still human. We still need close friends, our immediate family, to love and to hold. That touch and this caring is essential to us, but we no longer rely on relationships in order to survive. We still need those close ones to thrive. But beyond that, the dense network of extended, small, strong ties that we once relied on, it's not needed now, and it will be needed even less in the future. But what we do need now is a social structure suitable for navigating a world of rapid change, and that is a big circle of highly diverse friendships that gives you access to what sociologist Mark Granovetter called the strength of weak ties, though actually he should have called it the strength of diverse ties. A wide range of information, opinions, expertise, experience. Such a network gives you access to new opportunities and new avenues of influence. And it's not just instrumental. We're still the fundamental social beings that we are by our biology. As Susie had said, the social media are a tool it's a tool that makes it social. And it's the reach and the range and this diversity that's what we need in a world where new technologies are quickly making yesterday's knowledge obsolete. And that type of social life is possible only with the aid of social media, the means of meeting, learning about, and interacting with other people at that kind of vast scale. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith. We will, before we go to our final floor round, we'll do the last two main speakers of this evening's debate. We'll start with the proposition. We will move over to Zayad Ramli, who is the former social media leader at Al Jazeera English, who now works as a digital news consultant in London. Zayad, the floor is yours. Someone can bring him a microphone because he hasn't got a headset. Thank you. There's one.
Hello. All right, so I had a very different introduction written, but you've all made some lovely points, so I'm gonna kind of freewheel for a bit. We have talked a lot about connectivity. We've talked about criminality. We have talked about the definitions of social and antisocial and good and bad, but I want to go back to a point that my teammate Paige mentioned about design, because I think that is the most important point to understand whether or not social media is itself antisocial. So Facebook is what it is today. It's a multi-billion-dollar company because it's extremely good at making you antisocial. In a recent interview with Axios, former Facebook president Sean Parker himself explained their reasoning when they were developing the platform. And I quote, "How do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible?" So they created this social validation feedback loop, likes, shares, comments. As one gentleman mentioned, the commoditization of friends. They did this so it kind of becomes an addictive contest to get more likes, to get more shares. They wanted to rob this time from you. They wanted to take this time out of the real world and suck you into their platform. And, when we talk about technology platforms and how they measure success, yes, they talk about how many dollars they earn. That's very important to them. But they also measure your time spent. It's impossible to overstate how much time, how many resources these companies put in to figuring out how to rob you of more and more and more time. So to give you some examples, Snapchat have streaks. So you send someone a snap, they snap you back. You send someone a snap and it says, oh, hey, you've got this streak. And they want you to feel that you have to jump back into the app, that you have to respond. Facebook A/B test everything from button sizes to colors to auto-playing video. Does it have sound? Does it not? The whole point is to get you to engage more, to get you to spend more time on their platform. Social media users are manipulated and tested on in ways that they don't even comprehend all to capture their attention, to make them antisocial. Antisocial behavior isn't an unfortunate byproduct of social media, as some had said. It is definitely by design.
But surely if by design, social media forces users to spend more time on their network, doesn't it mean necessarily that they are increasing the amount of social interactions that take place? I mean, surely the ends justify the means, don't they?
Yeah, so I'm not here to talk about the net effect and whether one balances the other. What I am explaining is the how and the why and the social media or antisocial behavior that actually is a direct result of these platforms. Now, the opposition have made a lot of lovely points about connectivity. Yes, social media connects us with the larger world. It's amazing. Social media has ushered in a connected era unlike anything we've ever seen before. If I want to talk to a young politician in Kenya, if I want to talk to Iraqi DJs in Dubai, I can. It's easier than ever. Accepting that social media connects us, accepting that social media can be a force for good, and accepting that social media makes us antisocial, these are not mutually exclusive ideas. I don't think you have to have one and lose the others. I want to zoom out for a bit here and talk about something that's really fascinating to me, which is privacy. So social media has become both a system in which we lose privacy in a massive way. We are constantly being surveilled upon, but it's also a tool in which we manufacture privacy for ourselves. So people want to have control over their own social situations. They want to have agency to exert this control. People need privacy. They work very hard to create it. They put up walls, they put up fences, they close their doors. And when you can't actually create it, you trick yourself into manufacturing it. So think about what most people, at least in North America or the UK, do when they're getting changed in a locker room. They look down at the ground. Maybe they drape themselves with a little towel or a little piece of fabric. And all of a sudden, it's like they're not naked in a dirty room full of strangers. They've manufactured this privacy because it helps them. And it really strikes me how effective a tool social media has become in creating the illusion of privacy. So if you're on the tube and you don't want to actually engage with someone, you're scared that someone might start a conversation with you, you can pull out your phone, you can go on Instagram, you can go on Tinder, you can just start swiping. If you're standing around waiting for a friend, you can Snapchat a photo of your feet and it suddenly is less awkward for you. You've created this privacy bubble and you're not thinking about the outside world and how they're viewing you. So you can use social media to escape from this world where you're not in control and create your own world where you are. You know, escaping from the real world is in and of itself an antisocial action. We've talked a lot about trolls. We've talked a lot about sexual abuse images. We've talked a lot about malicious actors and hate speech. And I think that really touches on the point that social media has changed fundamentally the way that we interact in the real world with each other. It's so easy to block someone on Twitter. It's so easy to hide a comment on Facebook. We create these filter bubbles where we don't have to actually think about opposing views. And when we are forced to confront them, we generally reject them in absolute terms. For example, anyone who voted for Trump is a racist moron. All Muslims are terrorists. These are phrases that started out online and have now become so normalized that it's common to hear them on TV. It's common to hear them in cafes. It's common to hear them at bars. Oh, I'm not so sure about those Muslims. You know, this is in and of itself antisocial behavior. There is no doubt that our society is more divided now than it was 10 years ago. And the antisocial behavior that social media fosters plays a massive, massive part in this. Now, platforms like Facebook and Twitter are extremely powerful tools that have empowered millions and made information more accessible than ever. Some of you have brought up examples where you have worked with Facebook to create, hashes that they distribute for free. I work with Facebook and Snapchat and Twitter very regularly. They hire good people. They hire a lot of amazing people doing a lot of amazing work. But this does not negate the fact that at their essence, they are doing all of this to take that time from you, to make you antisocial. This is PR to them. They don't really care about you. They care about their bottom line. They're not accountable to you or any of us. They're accountable to their investors. Their goal is to grow. Their goal is to make money. And they do that by taking your time from you. So I'm not arguing that social media is good or bad. I'm not going to argue whether or not the net result is worth it. I think that is not something I am capable of coming to the conclusion of. But in the question of whether social media is antisocial or not, absolutely it's antisocial. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zayed. Our final speaker on opposition side this evening is Glenn Brown. Glenn is the Chief Digital Officer of the Obama Foundation and has previously worked at Twitter, YouTube, and Google, and was the CEO of the nonprofit Creative Commons in its first 3 years. Glenn, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President, Madam President. I'm going to keep calling you Madam President, the same way we call President Obama, even though he's out of office. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me here today. I should note that I won't be representing any official positions of the Obama Foundation today, and nor, of course, do I speak for President Obama. But I will begin with a quote about President Obama that I find inspiring. It's from a piece by Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic magazine last year. It's from very different context, foreign policy, but I think it works here. Quote, "He has a tragic realist understanding," this is about the president, "he has a tragic realist understanding of sin, cowardice, and corruption, and a Hobbesian appreciation of how fear shapes human behavior. And yet he consistently, and with apparent sincerity, professes optimism that the world is bending towards justice. He is, in a way, a Hobbesian optimist." So Hobbesian optimism, that's a term I want you to have in mind as I go through this. I won't waste time repeating or directly rebutting the social media ailments that we've heard of regarding the things that we currently call social media on side proposition. Instead, I oppose the motion today as generally short-sighted, as fatalistic, and despite its surface appeal, just a little too easy. On its face, though some of the arguments, I must concede, fleshed out the point to some extent, but the motion itself had a fatal flaw, I thought, that it overlooked the key element of what defines what is or is not social, and that is the role of human beings. Social media themselves, and I use it plurally not to be pedantic, but to illustrate how much they vary and how numerous they are. As a general category, they don't have any inherent attributes other than they help people communicate. They're technologies that allow people to communicate. Now, I mentioned that the motion is short-sighted. Social media existed well before, quote, unquote, social media. That is to say, the technology actually preceded the coinage used to describe the current incarnation of what we call social media. I won't go as far back as the printing press, but a little bit more recently, things like simple mail transfer protocol, Usenet, the World Wide Web, the underlying internet, cellular networks, all these things were and are social media, a largely public layer built by rough engineering consensus and standards bodies. Encryption, I think, is an entirely different debate. I think you made some great points, Professor, around encryption, but I would consider that to be a separate category from what we consider to be social media, and I think potentially a much more difficult debate. Now, if we, like the proposition, fail to take the long view around what is social media or what will social media be, it's easy to forget that it's still very new. It's easy to forget the still very new, unprecedented democratizing opportunity that these technologies opened up for social discourse and information flow. Now today, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, YouTube, etc., are the current layer of social media stacked on top of their predecessors. And whatever the pros and cons of these particular companies, they are not the end of the story. As long as humans and computers coexist on the planet, there'll be some sort of social media. And whatever anybody claims to profess, we have little idea what the next wave or waves of social media will look like, other than that they will exist in some form. Which gets us to the House's motion's unfortunate fatalism. Whether tomorrow's media will be social or antisocial is yet unwritten, not fated by whatever is happening on social today. And indeed, simply declaring social media to be antisocial in a way echoes the arguments we sometimes hear from the big platforms. Don't look at us. It's the algorithm. It is the way it is. But obviously, humans are responsible for writing and managing the algorithm, as some of the arguments on proposition have pointed out. And clearly, humans are responsible for how it gets used in daily life, as both sides have pointed out. So first, let's address the former, product designers. I was very glad to hear Team Proposition talk about the element of design. The proposition motion implies that the problem is power devolved to the masses, to the mob, to social, but this misses the key point, that power over information flow has simply shifted from one traditional elite, broadcasters, political elites, media elites, to a new elite, an elite of algorithm designers. And this new elite are only beginning to understand their designs have negative externalities, how an economist would describe an antisocial trait as an externality, as well as benefits. I don't think it can be credibly argued that these networks are by design antisocial, given the numerous examples of pro-social uses that my colleagues have given. But like pollution or consumer goods with risky features, antisocial media patterns are a byproduct of industry, indeed, not by design, and undesirable features that sometimes accompany desirable ones. As with these other hazards, this and future generations of designers must recognize that a product that fails to manage its social costs is simply a broken product. Not irredeemably evil, but bad user experience, bad UX, as the term goes. Intent of the social media is irrelevant when we're dealing with these corporations. We're dealing with the individual designers. And what about the rest of us, the users? Speaking of human responsibility, how much responsibility should we bear for our antisocial behavior online? Plenty in the obvious extreme cases of outright unmitigated evil like child pornography or trolling or other abuses like this. But for all these other problems that we've discussed today, filter bubbles, et cetera, it seems, again, too easy to put all the responsibility on the end users, particularly for things like addiction. So remember the argument, cigarettes don't make people sick, smokers do. Well, who buys that? In past generations, a lot of people bought that. In current generations, very few people buy that argument. So as with any addiction, whether it's a screen addiction or an addiction to news or points of view that we already agree with, or an addiction to only interacting with people who have our views, or with any collective action problem, which this also is, it's too much to ask a globe of people, or 2.5 billion people as it is now, to kick the habit as individuals. So then what? As with any addiction or any collective action problem, the answer is not white knuckles, it's not isolation, it's not isolated cases of arduous virtue, though those certainly help, but cooperation and structured systems of recovery, improvement. Not individual human by individual human, but through networks of humans. And not through criminal conspiracies, because I put those in a different category, but through social compacts or social contracts, which, ironically enough, might be aided by the very networks that sometimes pose these antisocial challenges. So what if we turn the network effects that bind social media on their head? If we used our social connections, reinforced by technology, to curb our antisocial habits online, to do a little social media jujitsu. If network effects can increase our dependency on platforms, surely they could also help us to become less dependent. The same notion underlies why we have holidays, weekends, smoke-free zones, private places, and other social compacts that help us save us from ourselves. Critical social mass eventually self-reinforces. Opting out actually is an option if you do it as a team, in all these different examples that I pointed out, when it's done, ironically enough, socially. And if we can teach bots to target as perfect advertising or perfectly confusing propaganda, surely we can teach them to help filter forms of social media pollution. If that sounds too fanciful, just think about anti-spam software, which does exactly that thing on the older generation of social media known as email. So to be clear, I'm not arguing that the machines themselves or artificial intelligence will save us, not some Deus Ex machine learning that will save us. It will take humans, once again. So who among you future leaders in this hall or people online out there, this next generation of product designers and business managers and other kinds of leaders will help create those digital pollution filters for social media to change the incentive structures and business models of the next wave of media away from an advertising-based model, which is so responsible for a lot of the issues of privacy and other forms of addiction that I discussed before. To wrap up, you will notice I've spent nearly no time at all praising the benefits provided by social media. My colleagues have covered that beautifully. The examples are innumerable. Instead, I will close by saying that this is a phase change. This is no less than an inflection point in history. It's much bigger than what we call social media currently, and it's too radical for us to succumb to a moral panic, though that's understandable. Too large to simply label as antisocial. With the long view and the big picture in mind, we can double down on the truly social and manage, if not eliminate fully, the antisocial. For these reasons, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to not deny the challenges of social media, but not to be fatalists, to join me in Hobbesian optimism about technology, to opt out of the bad parts of social media if you want, but not to opt out of reality, to step up, be sociable, and play yourself a role in the future of social media, and to oppose the motion before the House, which is the door on the left. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenn, for your closing speech. We'll go to a final floor round before we call a vote on this motion. Would anybody like to make a speech in proposition? At the back, yes.
Hi there. My name is Grant Allen Nichol. I study at St. Edmunds. Today we've talked a lot about the horizontal interchange of views, the network of interdependent relationships that are formed through social media. However, I kind of do take a little bit of a dystopian viewpoint around social networks, especially in social nets themselves, and actually producing a kind of antisocial behavior. I mean, it's kind of interesting to kind of fact that we talk about creating a positive network through them that I actually see creates kind of a matrix of addiction and criminality and distortion that's actually quite unhelpful in the modern world. So I'd actually just like to kind of actually talk about Thomas Hobbes and say that maybe it's time for Facebook's life to actually be maybe a little bit nasty, brutish, and short, and it's maybe time for it to actually be broken up, because at the end of the day, it's just really getting too big, and it's like AT&T, it's time for the good of the health of the world for actually just some competition to be put into place.
Thank you. Thank you. Does anybody have a point in opposition of the motion they'd like? Yes.
I was just wondering if it would have been possible for this debate to happen today had it not been for social media, because without it, it would have been very difficult to meet or organize or announce this debate happening here today.
Thank you. And any speakers in Paige, would you like to reply to that?
Yeah.
Paige can reply, yes.
So I would definitely agree that we use social media to promote today, and that helped. But I would also note that if you look back 100 years, or if you look in the photographs, one, they were definitely over fire capacity, so I wouldn't advocate this. But two, every single debate would have had benches filled and the floor filled. And when you look at record numbers of how many people came along to these debates, they definitely number more than the fullest capacity that we ever had this term.
We'll move on to any speeches in abstention of the motion. Yeah, Gabriel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Media says it all. It is a mediator between people. And ultimately, what is contained on that media is the responsibility of the people who put it out there. We can talk about whether it is inherently good or bad, but that is a nonsense. It's like saying whether books are inherently good or bad. They're not. It depends on what's inside them. 50 Shades of Grey, the Bible, Harry Potter, each of them, we'd say, have a different content and a different moral message. Social media is the same. You wouldn't be able to say whether the things on social media are good or bad in themselves. The question is whether that transition of knowledge, whether that transfer in itself is good or bad. And that question I would also argue is impossible. There is only one solution tonight, to say that communication itself cannot be said to be good or bad, social or antisocial. It is just a thing through which opinions pass. And thus the only logical solution before the House is to abstain, to say it is neither good nor bad, and it is the responsibility of each of us in this House tonight to make it good or bad, depending on what we want. The people on both sides of this debate have made eloquent arguments for why it can be either, but it is for us to decide individually which of those it is. And if you believe it's either, the answer is still to pass through the middle, to say it's up to you to make it so. So I ask all of you to abstain tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Paige, you have a right to reply.
Short right of reply. I would urge you to go through side proposition, not least because Gabriel told us a lot about discussing this motion on good or bad. Unfortunately, the motion before the House was not whether social media was good or bad. So if you want to decide on that motion, another night perhaps. If you want to decide on whether it's antisocial, go through the right-hand door.
Thank you, Paige. We did have quite a lot of interest from floor speeches. I'm going to go around one more time quickly. Anybody in proposition? Yes. And please state your name and college. Thank you.
I'm Rihanna, and a Rihanna voice. I'm at Trinity. Everyone here is sociable. We're all here talking to other people. We have the opportunity to interact with them. We might find it hard to talk about the things which really matter to us and what's the innermost part of our soul. And we might find it hard to form really strong friendships with others. But we all do see other people. The most socially isolated group in modern-day Britain is the elderly. And I just want to read you some statistics. 11% of elderly people are not in contact with anyone less than once per month. So that means that I think I've messed it up. But 11% of elderly people don't speak to anyone else less than once per month. Do you understand what I mean? Anyway, 2/5 of old people say that their TV is their main company. Up to 13% of elderly people claim that they are always lonely. I think it's tough to argue that social media in any significant way benefits the elderly or connects them. In fact, it does the opposite. It distances them from society. If this is the case, i.e. that it worsens the social disadvantage of some of the most vulnerable people in our society, then I think it's quite a stretch to suggest that social media is anything but antisocial.
Thank you, Rihanna. If anyone wants to know the real statistic, you can ask her afterwards. Or next term, yeah. Do you have any speeches in opposition of the motion? Yes.
Oliver Lazelle, Trinity. We've heard tonight about some very weighty issues, the Arab Spring, paedophilia, peace movements, but I'd like to introduce an even weightier topic than all of those, meme bridge. And of course, kind bridge, crush bridge, even grudge bridge. And I think that this university, therefore, provides quite a good sort of case study about the benefits that social media can bring. Because after all, Cambridge has quite a lot of centrifugal forces. We all go to different colleges, all do different subjects. But it's through all of these shared Facebook pages that so many people follow. I think Crushbridge is on 10,000 followers. I can't actually remember what Memebridge is on. That it creates a process where all of us at this university are seeing the same jokes, laughing at the same jokes, realizing how much we all have in common, and thus creating this sort of a spirit de corps common to not just to our college, but to Cambridge as a whole. I think that at this university these days, social media is vital to that. And therefore, I do believe that even without meeting all 9,000 undergraduates face to face, it can allow us to feel that degree of connection that we wouldn't otherwise. And therefore, I urge everyone to oppose this motion.
Thank you, Oliver. And finally, any more speeches in abstention? Yes. Cool.
In the wake of mass shootings in the US, it's gone quite somber all of a sudden, we often hear people saying these things aren't guns' fault, they're people's fault. And I probably agree with President Obama that maybe, firearms legislation has an impact on the ability of people who maybe want to kill other people to use firearms to do that. But I think this kind of idea is something that's quite important to this debate. We've heard from each side how social media makes people antisocial, makes people social by disconnecting them or connecting them with other people. And we've heard from the abstention that maybe it's not quite as simple as that. From the proposition, we've heard that someone stuck on a tube with lots of other people around wants to take a Snapchat just of their feet, and that makes them antisocial. But I think it's pretty easy to say that the kind of person who's feeling a bit awkward around all those people on the tube, who wants to just take a Snapchat of their feet, that's probably the kind of person who isn't incredibly social in the first place. And when we look at the opposition, the kind of people who are made much more social by social media, the kind of people who have 500 friends, who they're really their friends, and they spend all their time talking to them, those kind of people probably would have been social without social media. And so what I think neither side has sufficiently convinced me of at the very least, and I would argue that they haven't convinced you of tonight, is that social media makes us more or less antisocial than we were before. I think it's quite easy to say how social media makes it easier to be ourselves. It makes it easier for an antisocial person to be antisocial. It makes it easier for a social person to be more interactive with other individuals. But thus far, I don't believe we have heard why it makes it such that a social person would be antisocial, an antisocial person would be social. And as a result of that, I can't vote for the proposition, I can't vote for the opposition, and I must beg you to abstain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angus. And that concludes this evening's main debate. The motion before the House was, this House believes social media is antisocial. Before we all get up and go, I just want to say a final thank you to Paige and the fantastic Michaelmas team, of which there are many, many people who've made this amazing term happen. I also want to say, hopefully you're looking forward to next term. One quick notice about that is that if you buy a Springball ticket before the end of Sunday, you'll be entered into a draw to win free garden party tickets. So you'll be signed up for the rest of the year to all the union events that you'd need to go to anyway. But you can do that on the union website. Thank you very much for attending. As usual, if you'd like to vote for the proposition, please walk through the door on the right marked ayes. The opposition, please, the door on the left marked noes. And the really big door in the middle, if you'd like to abstain, but that is not a reflection of how many people will be abstaining this evening. Or is it? But thank you very much, and have a good evening.